All right, folks, welcome back to Talking Soccer. I am Justin Horniker. I know it's been a minute since we've talked in this audio visual medium, but thank you so much for joining me. Today, we are going to talk a bit about the last up and down week of St. Louis City SC. I know it's been a moment since we've had this check-in. I want to be more regular with these going forward. If you want a more in-depth, or if you just want to read along with what I'm about to talk about today, the 4-1 loss to the Seattle Sounders, the 4-0 win over FC Tulsa midweek, on talkingsoccer.com. I have my most recent notebook of everything that went down this week, as well as some other insights from training and from City 2 and just being around the group and things that I don't have anywhere else to put. Now, before we get more into that, if that all sounds good to you, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube page. I'm also going to be talking about over on Talking Soccer, over on the newsletter, the USWNT's recent 3-game series against Japan, who kind of stood out the most, who had the most to gain from those matches, as well as every week before the start of the NWSL slate of matches, I put out a power rankings with kind of an in-depth recap of how each team is doing and why I feel they are where they are. I'm hoping to also turn that into a video format as well. But for now, you are here to watch me recap how St. Louis City SC kind of lost some momentum against the Seattle Sounders away at Seattle. 4-1, the score to this one. It's, not unsuspected. You look at how I've been talking in short form just about how tough the start of the season was always going to be for St. Louis City SC. And I think under Yohan May, I've been impressed with how quickly things have changed for this group. But there's still the underlying fact that there just isn't enough talent here to be truly competitive. And if you look at Seattle, what Seattle bring to the table, they are kind of the picture of MLS consistency. And if you want to be a contender in the Western Conference, even though Seattle usually take a little bit to get rolling through the season, especially through CONCACAF play, that has not really been the case this year. And while they haven't been operating at all cylinders, you can see from their rotation, from their depth, from just how they always have a player down in Tacoma, a player to come up through the depth on the bench to contribute. It's just a culture of next man up, and what Brian Schmetzer has done, especially over the past decade or the past 15 years in Seattle. It's what every MLS club is trying to accomplish through their youth, through their veterans they bring in, through all their signings. And for St. Louis, who have only beaten Seattle once at this point, which is last year in St. Louis on Eddie Lubin's free kick Golazo to win 1-0. That's the only time that St. Louis has ever had success against Seattle. So it really tells you just if Seattle are the litmus test for how you have to measure yourself as an MLS club, St. Louis so far have failed that litmus test. And if you look at their postseason results outside of the inaugural season, which even then, they're kind of exposed as frauds, I think it bears out in how things have gone. But to get back into how this season has gone, I've felt like they've been growing pretty steadily. I think you look at from the win against New England 3-1 in St. Louis, the draws at NYCFC and Dallas, and then coming up midweek for the U.S. Open Cup win against Tulsa, I felt like there was some real momentum brewing. And then this match, it all just kind of fell apart in a way that isn't unexpected. Because I think when you look at some of the things that happened here, the loss of Jaziel Orozco, which is wild to think that a year ago, Jaziel Orozco would be such a linchpin to the back three. But with Lucas McNaughton in for Orozco, who's still in concussion protocol as of Saturday's game, it's clear that the structure, the spacing was not where everyone wanted it to be, where everyone is used to playing it with Polvera to the left of Timo Baumgartel, with McNaughton to the right of Baumgartel. And I think it maybe opens up the question that if Orozco is still not able to go, is this where you maybe start to see Mbake, who played Wednesday in a relief appearance, who is still kind of getting up to speed, it seems like, and is still missing the defensive solidity as well as just the predictability that I think DeMay wants in his center backs, that Orozco, for as much as still a very young player, still 21, still maybe not as flashy as an Mbake, who, if you remember him as a teenager with LAFC, with what he can do on the ball, in the air, with his passing ability, Orozco doesn't necessarily give you that, but he's not a net negative either. But position-wise, and I think just in terms of grit and ability to make runs and ability to recover, it's obviously Demay's number one choice right now. And that is unexpected, but not necessarily unproven. So coming to this one, not to say that's the reason that St. Louis lose, but you can see where they lose some of that tightness in the chain that held out against NYCFC and left them feeling like they should have left with a point against Dallas. And Seattle definitely exploited that. But that was not the big issue here. St. Louis, through 15 minutes, had control of the game. They through 15 minutes had 70% of the possession, but only 2 shot attempts, 1 shot on target from Marcel Hartel in the second minute. And that is kind of the story of the attack through this point in the season. You know, the bases are there, the structure is there. You can see what Demay is building, and you can see the players have bought in. You can see that they have been well coached, and you can see that how this team plays with the ball, how they move with the ball, how they build in the attacking third. If you were to show this to me last year with how they were playing under Olaf Melberg at this time, and then under David Critchley, and just the DNA of this team, even taking the Olaf Melberg out of the equation, like, has always been that they're playing more direct, playing more straight line. They're not having these intricate passing patterns. They're trying to get to the outside. They're trying to beat you in transition. They're trying to beat you upfield physicality wise. And Olaf Melberg's version of this was definitely missing a lot of the intricate passing networks and the well-drilled passing sequences that they have found under Johan Demay. And it's incredible to see a lot of these same players able to do this when a year ago it just seemed like there's no juice here to squeeze. But you can see when they get into the attacking third that there's still something missing here. Simon Betcher through 62 minutes had just 16 or 17 touches of the ball. And when I asked Johan Demay, and I asked Chris Durkin about this after the match as well, that it seemed like there was just a link missing. And both of them kind of said they were rushing through the attacking third. They were rushing some passes that they wished, if they could go back and take a mulligan, that they would take more time, be more patient, set up shop in the attacking third, and try to prod their way through Seattle versus trying to force some passes, force some crosses that just simply weren't there. And I think that is apt, because if you look at Conrad Valum, you look at Rafael Santos, look at their crossing completion rate, both of them combined, Conrad Valum was 0 for 2, and Rafa Santos was 0 for 5. So combined 0 for 7 crossing from your wing backs, when that is kind of like the mode of attack that they've kind of settled into in transition. Not good enough. Certainly not good enough. Thomas Totland comes in later in the match, and at least he's winning duels and getting them in some attacking positions. But the wingback position has been a real problem, especially for a group that seems to want to create through those wide spaces. We'll talk a little bit more after Edouard Leuven comes in and what I feel like maybe is a saving grace for that. But this game itself is defined by just the collective performance. I don't think you can really pin this on any one player outside of bright spots of Marcel Hartel. It's never his problem. He's always the one that links things together. He's always the positive player in these, just because of that is the player that he is. And the offense runs through him, and defensively he's been on point. But 2 straight corner kicks. If you are tracing this game through the first 20 minutes, St. Louis are on the front foot. They're taking it to Seattle. You're impressed with how this is going. Seattle are able to claw back some momentum. They have a shot opportunity in the 21st minute. They win a corner off of that. On the subsequent corner kick, Christian Roldan, he lines up at the top of the box. He meanders over to the far post. And Seattle talked about this after the match. They saw something in St. Louis's corner marking scheme that they felt they could exploit. Rusnak delivers this ball on a platter right to where Christian Roldan is at the far post. It's a great header. It's a great pass, but ultimately it's there because Christian Roldan lines up at the top of the box, slowly makes his way to the far post, but is disconnected from the meat wall, disconnected from the massive bodies centrally, and no one recognizes that Roldan is there and that someone needs to make an adjustment and go mark him, because they're waiting for everyone centrally to run to where they are in the box and then to mark him at that point, versus trying to follow them, getting lost in the sauce. Seattle were able to exploit that. You can even see this even worse on the second free kick and the second corner kick, where there's more than just Christian Roldan making that move at the far post and still not being recognized. So that second one especially is what Yohan Deme was angry about afterwards. And yeah, I mean, this is like, it's incredible that this happened twice. It's incredible, not necessarily as incredible that it happened once, but that on the second one, there was no adjustment made. And I'm not sure who to put the blame on. Like, obviously, put the blame on the set piece marking scheme, on just the collective players to not recognize this. But there's no like one blown coverage here. Everyone is marking a player. Everyone is in the box, in the massive bodies. And someone just has to recognize that they need to go cover the far post. Now, subsequently, they tried this again a third time, and it is well marked at that point. But yeah, and at this point, you're down 2-0 going into the half. Like, that is the game. Never seemed like St. Louis were going to be able to claw back from here. Entering the second half, this is where you really notice the McNaughton to Baumgartel spacing issue. Sounders are able to create right on the other side of half. Connor Valum is out of position, has to rush back, draws the penalty, and then Albert Rusnak's penalty is pretty simple from there. Now you're 3-0 in the 49th minute. A worrying trend here as well, in that all but one away match this year, they've allowed a goal, all but the LAFC match where it was scoreless heading in late into that game. They've allowed a goal on the other side of halftime within the first 7 minutes, essentially. And that's something worth paying attention to here as we go about the season. Now they've faced really tough opponents. They've played in places where it's really hard to win away. If you think about at San Diego, at NYCFC, at Dallas, at Seattle, at LAFC, all very tough places to play. And I've talked a lot about the strength of schedule where like it's really just a gauntlet until you get to the World Cup break. And then after that, you get a lot of the first and second looks at the teams around you underneath the playoff line and around the playoff line. But until then, like, it's a real tough slate for St. Louis. And up until this point, they've really held their own. Obviously, you have the San Diego match where both those goals were probably too easy, but they were able to find their way back in that match. Against LAFC, they just kind of held until the dam broke loose. But this was the first time they were really like run off the pitch, I felt like. And one that they're going to have to really come back from, really recover from. Azaz De Rosario gets a goal in the 86th minute to make it 4-1. And then after that, Edouard Leuven comes on and gets a nice little consolation goal. Edouard Leuven returning, that's going to mean so much for this team. And that he scores as Sergio Cordova really takes a bunch of players with him, makes a nice run on the ball, a shot, it gets deflected right into the path of Edouard Leuven, who's following up the attempt and just blasts it in on goal. And like how the season goes from here up until the summer break, when they do bring in some reinforcements, when Corey Ray does the summer business, is kind of reliant on how Edouard Leuven can integrate into the attack. Yohan Deme talked about it, and we've talked about it a lot. Edouard Leuven started at City 2 last week in that right 10 spot. So the City formation, the St. Louis formation, is a 3-4-3, but really it's a 3-4-2-1, where you have two 10s. Your left side 10, which is Marcel Hartel, and your right side 10, who has been trying to be figured out. Started as Sanbin. Lately it's been Cedric Toyert. And if you look at the American Soccer Analysis stats on this, like Toyert has been the best player on this team so far, especially in the attack. So like that has been the right call, going with Toyert as that right 10. Sangbin played well on Wednesday and actually played well when he came in relief in this match. So maybe starting to find some confidence there as well. And then up top, Simon Betcher has been the starting striker. Sergio Cordova is the DP striker for now, but that's merely a bookkeeping thing. Even if they trigger his buy option in the summer, he won't be a designated player. But as on paper, that designated striker, while it took him a minute to get rolling and playing out on the wing ties into some of his numbers as well, Yohan Deme trying to make it work with Betcher up top, with Cordova out in the wing, and they actually went to this look in the New England game, and Cordova did a very good job defensively and really shutting down New England from really trying to claw back into that game at all. And I think it kind of tricked him into thinking that the 5-2-3 structure was a way they could go going forward. But it didn't necessarily work against Dallas. Cordova didn't have very many chances in that game and was kind of isolated out in the wing. And some of that is with how he interplays with Connor Advalum and it not really working in that instance. But you see on Wednesday against FC Tulsa, and I'll do a little bit deeper of a dive later in this video, they win 4-0. Sergio Cordova doesn't have a goal in that match, but he's fouled 5 times. He does very good build-up play. He's drugged down. He wins a lot of free kicks. And in the link-up play, like, he's very, very important. And if you look at what Yohan Deme wants out of his starting striker, he's been very complimentary of Cordova, what he brings to the table. And I think it is because he does a lot of that work. He does the dirty work off the ball, in the press, ability to disrupt. But really, it's about being more of that guy in between the lines versus the guy stretching the lines. And I think Cordova is going to do a better job of that going forward than what Simon Betcher has done so far. And if you look at the case for Simon Betcher as starting striker, which I did make over the offseason, it was that Betcher was, even if he wasn't scoring at the rate he was supposed to, his advanced numbers should have predicted that as the striker, as a starting striker, he could score at a higher rate than he had been. Now, being asked to do different things in the previous system versus this system under Yohan Deme, but he is not doing those other things well right now either. And in fact, he doesn't have a single positive goals added category in the American Soccer Analysis database, which is a problem and doesn't really justify him still being in the starting lineup. When you look at this game where you're dealing with some rotation between Wednesday and Saturday and not necessarily the same starting 11, right? And even though Wednesday's match had 5 of the usual starters in it, Simon Betcher was not on the roster. He was given the rest along with Connor Advalum. And I think it then makes it interesting that Advalum and Betcher were among 2 of the real low points in this match. Rafa Santos as well. Those 3 had very, very poor matches against Seattle. And it makes you wonder what that roster looks like going forward and what Deme needs to see. And I think a lot of people might be frustrated with Yohan Deme's rotation if my mentions are anything to go off of. But at least until this point, you can see the structure, you can see what Deme wanted, and maybe he was a little bit apprehensive getting some players to start, still early in implementing his system. This is about like who can keep that structure, who understands their role. But now we're getting to the point where coming up on 2 months into the season, a fourth of the season has been played. And now you're getting a better sense of who has a higher upside, who like needs to be in those roles going forward. And I look at Mekhi Joyner's play at wingback on Wednesday. Obviously, Joyner is a player that, you should want on the pitch all the time, but Deme had wanted him to be in that right side of 10 role coming out of preseason because he likes how he can invert. On left side, which is kind of more of his natural position, we've seen through City 2 and through his play with the first team last season that he's been on the left side as a winger. Some play at wing back, but you're kind of taking him out of his preferred role at that point because he needs to be on the front foot. He needs to be in the attack. On Wednesday against FC Tulsa, he was able to do a little bit of both. And while he did take a minute to really build into the game, playing wing back, playing the defensive side, I thought he did a good job. And of course, he scores the free kick goal that makes it 3-0. And I thought over the last half of that game, he really got into the attack. He did some good stuff defensively as well against a really physical FC Tulsa. So you look at how these wingbacks are playing. You look at Mekhi Joyner. You look at Thomas Totland playing well on Wednesday and then coming in relief here and being better than either wingback. I also look at how some of the wingbacks have been playing with City 2, and I think it's worth looking at Riley Lynch and how Tyson Pierce has been playing. Pierce has been with the first team all through preseason. He's a homegrown 18-year-old, and Yohan Deme has spoken highly of him. When I asked about him last week and over the last couple of weeks, he was injured in preseason, suffered an injury coming out of preseason, and just has had to be integrated from there. So there are some options. It's still a team that is at a talent deficit. If you look at where they're at now, where they're going to be at in 2 more windows under Corey Ray, I think you'll still see a very, very different team than where you're at now. But for a team that was brought in under a different sporting director largely to play a different style, for them to be at this point where they can play with the ball so well, where they can build up with the ball as well as they can, it's still missing something in the attacking third, obviously. But it's easy to at least be somewhat optimistic, even after a drubbing in Seattle like this, of just where this team is at. I think my expectations coming into this season were pretty low, especially over the first half, knowing how tough the schedule was and how much they were going to need to change and how much the roster didn't really turn over. And I am pleasantly surprised through what we've seen so far. Now, still just one win on the season. The win against Tulsa, that's a game that you just have to win. That's I think when we get into the broader US Open Cup discussion, there's really nothing for it of MLS clubs. Of course, everyone wants MLS clubs to be in the competition for the health of the competition, for the health of US soccer. And this is why I think that if there's a way to feasibly do this for the lower league club to always host, because what is in it for St. Louis hosting FC Tulsa? You're either going to win as expected and everyone in attendance gets to see some nice goals. You get to see some homegrown starting maybe, but the downside is you could also go for your team to lose, get cup set, lose to a team that they have no business, or at least they think they have no business losing to. You look at some of the rough results from the last round of the US Open Cup. Sporting Kansas City losing 3-0 to Colorado Springs. Austin losing at Louisville. There are some real tough. DC United losing to 1 Knoxville at home, a USL League One side. What do you get as a DC United fan going to that match? You get to see your team get upset by a third division club. That's not a huge selling point for the MLS sides. That's why, even though it's not monetarily feasible, I understand why it can't be done, why some clubs can't host. FC Tulsa play at a minor league baseball stadium. They don't have complete control over their grounds. In an ideal world, I just wish there was enough money in this competition to make it more enticing for all MLS clubs, for all clubs up and down the pyramid, but also that you could have some more excitement with these lower league clubs hosting. But for now, for St. Louis City SC's purposes, you got to saw a pretty fun starting 11. You got Songbin scoring off a direct goalkeeper assist from Roman Berkey. You saw Miguel Perez playing pretty well in that double pivot role. You saw Sergio Cordova playing some good hold-up play. You saw Mekhi Joyner free kick where he really just telecommunicated with Marcel Hartl. Hartl, talking after the match, said that he just kind of gave Mekhi a look and essentially told him that go take it, because the goalkeeper was cheating, thinking that Hartl was going to take it, and then Joyner just curled it around the wall and curled it past the goalkeeper. And then you saw Thomas Ostrak make his return and score on his first touch of the ball, essentially. So if you were in attendance of that match, you saw some good stuff, but I can certainly understand why a Wednesday night game against a lower league side is not necessarily the most enticing thing in the world. But for St. Louis's purposes, it gave them their second win of the season. It gives them the rivalry match with Chicago that the MLS scheduling gods did not gift them with this year, and a chance to go into Chicago and enact some revenge for that 2023 loss in the round of 32. So I think for this club to be putting their best foot forward in the US Open Cup, it's because they know that in this truncated season, just 4 more wins and they win a trophy. It's tough, obviously, and Chicago are playing well, but they're already in the round of 16. This is your chance to kind of jumpstart this project. Now, let's look ahead. Obviously, the loss to Sounders in the rearview mirror. Now you come home, you play San Jose, who has been a buzzsaw through the league so far. I think a lot of times we talk about San Jose, it's addition by subtraction. Chicho Arango leaves. Obviously, you would love to have a Christian Espinoza right now, but Christian Espinoza leaves. Joseph Martinez leaves. And, of course, you bring in Timo Werner, but Timo Werner has not been the star here. Nico Zakiris, it is Daniel Muni. It is a lot of domestic players, your Preston Judds, your super draft pick, Buddha. A lot of players that building through the super draft, building through this academy pipeline that has been broken for so long. If you think of how many players from the San Jose Earthquakes Academy that have gone on and been very good pros for other clubs, if those players were to come through San Jose, it would be a much different outlook over the past decade. But for now, Bruce Arena has kind of figured this thing out and has done it with a lot of domestic players, a lot of super draft picks, a lot of players that were kind of given up on, and it's pretty cool to see. Now they come to St. Louis. Now they will have a midweek match against Austin, so there will be some rotation. This is a team that also played midweek this week in the U.S. Open Cup against Phoenix Rising. So this away trip to St. Louis will not quite be the same as hosting an LAFC, who have kind of given it their all in CONCACAF competition to reach the semifinals and really seeing it out against Cruz Azul last week. A little bit different there. And St. Louis are somehow undefeated, 6-0-0 against San Jose. The one team that they have not lost to over the course of their club history. That's one that you feel like you have to win. And one that, as you're looking at the schedule and you're looking at, okay, which of these matches are matches that they can win in the first 14 games? There are not many of them, but I thought San Jose would be one, and it is now looking like San Jose is not a gimme anymore. They've only allowed 3 goals this season. If you think about last year, they were scoring a lot, but they're also allowing a ton of goals against. This year, that has not been the case. Of course, they're getting good goalkeeping again. That was not the case last year. And defensively, they've been very good. That back line is solid. Daniel Mooney. Hopefully, he'll be starting in St. Louis. If not, maybe Max Floriani makes his return as well. A lot of local connections with that club. But for St. Louis, like, you maybe thought you're going to get a little bit of a break, and now you don't. But let's look ahead at the schedule, because they've kind of played the toughest part. If you think of how hard the opening section of the schedule is, like New England are probably the only non-playoff club they faced through these first 8 matches. Now they have San Jose, again, probably a playoff club at this point. That U.S. Open Cup match against Chicago. Austin away is probably the next one that you would expect them to be able to go in and grab their first away game this year, or one that they should expect anyway, I should say. Maybe not us as a collective, but the one that the club should be looking at going into Austin and expecting to win. Austin have not been very good lately at all this season, but have still found a way to pull out results. So always iffy if you're not bringing your best foot forward. Colorado is a team that probably should have beaten Miami this weekend, has been very good this year. Another team that you might expect a gimme from. A game that is all of a sudden looking tough as well. You're home against LAFC, who will be tired with all this CONCACAF Champions Cup play. You saw against San Jose today as I'm recording this that they can slip up. That was their first slip up of the season. And of course, LAFC have always had St. Louis' number as well, even though they did play them pretty well in that first game, outside of the late not being able to hold on. If Edouard Leuven is in that match, maybe it's different. Then they go to DC United. That should be a gimme. So, okay, so you're at 4 matches that you could maybe think about as wins. San Jose, Austin, DC United, maybe Chicago. And then you're home against Austin FC again. And then it's the World Cup break. So you have your 2 Austin matches. Those are ones that you should look at as potential 6-pointers. Away at DC. DC has not been good at all lately. And then those are it as far as the games that you could expect to go in as favorites. Home against San Jose, maybe. Away at Chicago, the U.S. Open Cup, anything can happen. And it's a match. It's a game that St. Louis are probably taking a little bit more seriously than Chicago at this point, but who knows? Colorado, maybe that's a team that's going to run out of steam. I don't know. I think Matt Wells is doing a good job with the Rapids, but I don't know. His shtick is a little bit grating. So I think they'll be good. I think that'll be a tough game. 2 teams that do kind of want to play in a similar way, although DeMay a little more defensive oriented, Matt Wells a little more attacking oriented, and at altitude, it's always been tough for St. Louis City. So again, this is a tough opening 14 slate of matches. Then World Cup break into the summer when like Corey Ray should be doing a lot of work. This should be a little bit of a different look of a team coming out of the summer break. They'll have a DP spot open. They'll have room to maneuver, depending on what they do with Jake Irwood or Reich, depending on what they do with name a U22 player, right? And They open at home against Sporting Kansas City, who will also be making a lot of moves this summer, but a team that in Matt Doyle's column today wrote about how historically underlying numbers are worse than any team in the history of the league through this point in the season and through any 8-game stretch as far back as the American Soccer Analysis numbers go, which is back to 2014. So that's a team that even with reinforcements, it's going to need a lot and have not looked good. And then, coming out of that stretch, it's still tough because you have the Galaxy, Rapids again, Real Salt Lake, and then you're coming back into where over the back half of the schedule, just the way it is kind of shaken out, that's where you get a lot of your lower playoff, not playoff team matchups. But yeah, you're a club that you just have to take care of business and you just have to improve. At this point, you can say that the schedule's been tough, and I probably spent way too long on this, but it's been something that's been rattling around in my mind. And you can look at that as a good litmus test of where this club is. I don't know if I thought of this as a playoff club before the season kicked off. I maybe think that the talent could be there. And then you look at the Western Conference, and the Western Conference has been very good to start the season. But after the World Cup break, anything can happen. And I think for St. Louis, you just need to stay in contact with those lower playoff spots. And I think I believe in what Yondime is doing, but I don't necessarily believe that the talent is there to be able to compete at this point. So a long way to go, for sure. The Seattle game, to kind of bring this all full circle, is a good litmus test on where St. Louis are. You have your 1-0 loss at home, your 4-1 loss away. That kind of tells you that there is a lot of room to grow for this team and a lot of room that they have to grow if you want to hit the stated goals of this Corey Ray-led regime. And I think of everything that the club says publicly. It's a team that wants to compete. They don't want to be out of the playoffs year in, year out. But they do want to build a sustainable program. And I think you can look at how the academy has played. You can look at how City 2 is still undefeated, that things are happening underneath the first team that if they can support the first team, should be successful. If you look at the best clubs in the league, they're doing the right things underneath the first team, but then they're also getting the first team signings right. St. Louis just have to hit that last check mark of getting the first team signings right. Not something they've been able to do so far, but Corey Ray has some work to do. All right, folks. Thanks so much for watching. We'll come back later in the week to talk some NWSL, talk some U.S. women's national team, and then, big week of MLS coming up as well. So for now, if you like this video, if you find what I have to say is informative, I cover this team pretty much day in, day out. I am at training 2 times a week, so I do have a little bit of an insight as a more or less a beat reporter, if there are beat reporters in this sport, in this league. And hopefully that gives you some insight of what I've been seeing, what I've been hearing. And I'll stop rambling now. And folks, thanks again. If you want to read, I also have some more in-depth stuff on how City 2 have played, some of the homegrowns, and just some more numbers in the newsletter this week. So go to Talkin' Soccer. It'll be linked in the description below. Subscribe there if you want to read along with these videos. Again, I also have NWSL power rankings ahead of every match day, as well as some national team stuff. And just odds and ends, if I feel like writing, it'll be there outside of the stuff I do for St. Louis Magazine. Anyway, it's late. So, folks, we'll talk real soon. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great one, and happy soccer.